Hello and welcome back. Today I wanted to make a video that I think is just lacking from the YouTube community, and it's a mathematical explanation of what makes the Abjuration subclass of Wizard so good. There are already a lot of good builds on YouTube that use Abjuration Wizard, including in multiclass environments, and I think there's a lot of good information out there about Abjuration Wizard, but nobody actually just demonstrated mathematically why it's so good and how that compares to other classes. So I wanted to do that so that the resource exists and so that people who don't understand why people put it in S or S plus or like game breaking tier are doing what they're doing. So the Abjuration Wizard subclass has a core feature, and that core feature is called Arcane Ward. This is the description of Arcane Ward. The residual magic of your spells forms a ward around you that protects you from harm. Each time you cast an Abjuration spell, the intensity of the ward increases by the amount of the spell's level, up to a maximum of 2 times your wizard level. Each time you take damage, the ward blocks an amount of damage equal to its intensity, and its intensity decreases by 1. After each long rest, the ward's intensity resets and becomes the same as your wizard level. So, what I'm going to explain and show is that the total damage mitigation stored by Arcane Ward scales with the square of your wizard level. So first I should explain what the text means. So the idea is you begin the day, and Arcane Ward, say you're a level 6 Abjuration Wizard, you begin the day, you have 6 Arcane Ward charges. The next time you get hit, Arcane Ward will remove 6 damage from that hit that's hitting you, which can completely zero out the damage if it were only doing 6 damage, or 5 damage or less. And after having removed 6 damage from that hit, it uses up that charge of Arcane Ward, and you now have an Arcane Ward charge of 5. So 6 minus 1, 5. Then the next time you get hit, it would reduce 5 damage from that hit, and you would then have 4 Arcane charges left, etc. In combat, if you used an Abjuration spell, for example, Glyph of Warding, you could use Glyph of Warding at level 3, and you were starting at 4, you would suddenly then be at 7 Arcane Ward charge, and then you'd be able to go down 7, reducing 7 damage, reducing 6 damage, reducing 5 damage, etc. Because you can cast spells out of combat, and because there are certain ways to cheese this, you can actually basically start your combat at 2 times your wizard level relatively reliably by the time you get to Act 3. Which means you start your combat at, say your wizard level 10, you can always start combat at an Arcane Ward level of 20. And then you'll reduce damage by 20 for a hit, then by 19 for a hit, then by 18 for a hit, etc. The total damage mitigation you have stored up in Arcane Ward is the sum of all those charge levels. So if your maximum charge level were 20, you would add 20 to 19 to 18 to 17, etc. But that's just summing up the first 20 positive integers. And there's a formula for that. The formula for the sum of the first n positive integers, which is what this sigma notation on the left means, sum of the first n integers, is n times n plus 1 divided by 2. So the sum of the first 5 integers is 5 times 5 plus 1 is 6 divided by 2. 5 times 6 is 30. 30 divided by 2 is 15. The sum of the first 5 integers is 15. Or that's another way of saying 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1 is 15. Similarly, if I had 10, I could do 10 times 11 divided by 2 equals 55. So that's saying 10 plus 9 plus 8 plus 7 plus 6 plus 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1 equals 55. And those are things you can check if you're not familiar with this formula. If I use algebra to reduce this formula a bit, though, I can rewrite it as 1/2 of n squared plus 1/2 n. And the key I want to point to is that this leading term, the big term, is n squared. So that first term will grow faster than the other term. When I'm talking about summing up the first 10 integers, we're expecting that it's going to be about half of 10 squared. 10 squared is 100, half of 100 is 50. We already told you this total sum was 55. Most of that's just coming from that first term because this first term is giving you 50. Half of n is 5, 55. Similarly, if I put in 24, which is the highest possible Arcane Ward charge that you can get in Baldur's Gate 3 is 24. 24 squared is 576. Half of 576 is 288. So you'd expect that the value Arcane Ward would get you in its absolute maximal state is around 288. That said, um, that's all very practical, but consider now, in our case, the maximum possible value stored is twice our wizard level. So our n is 2l, where l is our wizard level. If we plug that into the formula, we can re-reduce the formula as 2 times l squared plus l. 2 times l squared plus l. Now, the real value of scaling with the square of your level is hard to compare to other things because most other things in Dungeons and Dragons or Baldur's Gate 3 don't scale along the lines of a nice formula like this. So for example, martial weapon damage doesn't actually change most of the time when you go, say, from level 2 to level 3 or from level 5 to level 6. Um, Actually, that's a bad example because with fighter level 6, you could get a feat. Say from level 6 to level 7, most of the time, like your martial weapon damage isn't changing based on your level directly. It's changing based off of breakpoints, such as getting feats, such as getting a higher enchantment on a weapon, etc. So it doesn't scale quite the same way. What I would contend, though, is that the value of this square growth has very high marginal gains between levels, which incentivizes maximizing how many wizard levels you put into a character using Arcane Ward. The marginal difference between between a level and the next level gets bigger and bigger the higher level you get because it's scaling with the square of the level. So I worked out this example. If you were at wizard level 11, you could max out Arcane Ward at 22 charges. And so your first proc would block 22 damage. After 13 hits, you would start blocking less than 10 damage per hit. And I chose that somewhat arbitrarily, but in Act 3, if you're reducing less than 10 damage from a hit, that's usually a lot less valuable than these other charges, where once you're blocking 10 or more damage from a hit, you're ignoring a lot of the incoming damage statistically in Act 3. But again, it's somewhat arbitrary. So after 13 hits, you start blocking less than 10 points of damage, and at that point, you've already blocked a sum total of 208 damage by using your charge for 22, 21, 20, 19, 18, etc. down through 10. And so I consider taking 10 or more damage off a hit, quote unquote, valuable, and taking less than 10 less valuable. Not useless. There are ways to build around that if you're only taking less than 10 damage off, but is notably less valuable than taking 10 or more damage off in Act 3. However, if I did this at wizard level 12, my first proc would be charge 24, which would block 24 damage, which is already blocking more damage on each hit, and it would take me 15 hits before I'm taking less than 10 damage off the hit, at which point I would have already blocked 255 damage. And then the percent differences are I have a 15% increase in valuable hits absorbed, or 2 extra hits that I care about, and I have a 22.5% increase in total damage absorbed. So these are very large double-digit percentage increases in value by just getting one extra wizard level. The differences earlier in the game between, say, levels 6 and 7 would be relatively small, with the one exception being you do want to make sure you get to wizard level 6. Wizard level 6, it becomes, instead of after each long rest, after each short rest, so it makes it much easier to refresh, as well as you can spend your reaction to use an Arcane Ward charge to block a hit on a party member, which then just gives you more chances to use it. So here are some considerations I would make for builds in using this. Arcane Ward obviously makes Augur of Agathis last longer, so that's why you see so many builds that don't actually max out to wizard level 12. Because what you can do is get one level of Cold Sorcerer and get Armor of Agathis that way, and you will make it last longer by reducing damage taken, which increases your outgoing retaliation damage with Armor of Agathis. Another consideration is that Arcane Ward is applied after damage resistances. So in other words, if you have a damage resistance, say to fire, and fire damage comes in, first it gets cut in two, it gets divided by two by your resistance, and then Arcane Ward subtracts damage off of what's remaining. So that means if you can trade wizard levels away for damage resistance, that's going to justify the loss in scaling, because cutting all hits of a certain type in half, or cutting just all hits in general in half, is going to make Arcane Ward so much more valuable. Damage resistant sources that are worth considering, I mean obviously Blade Ward for the physical ones, elixirs for specific types, Armor of Persistence is just a permanent Blade Ward, so you could for example do 11 levels of Abjuration Wizard and then a 1 level dip for Heavy Armor Proficiency, and wear Armor of Persistence, and be very nearly unkillable against melee hits. Racial bonuses sometimes, so certain races have resistance to say fire damage or poison damage, so it's worth considering that on certain builds. And then obviously Barbarian Rage is resistance against physical damage, or Wildheart Bear Barbarian Rage is resistance against all damage except for psychic damage, which is the vast majority of damage in the game. That explains a lot of the multi-class builds. That's why they don't go for this scaling. But I do think it's worth considering for your runs, playing around with this as a pure 12 level Abjuration Wizard. The total value you can get off of that is absolutely insane. And it's a really simple way to play with this mechanic and learn how mechanics work, and be able to compare the scaling of this mechanic to other scalings of mechanics in practice, and see just how crazy it is that you have a mechanic that is scaling with the square of your level. Thanks for watching.